Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. And welcome to today's video by the Aviation Week Network. I'm Molly McMillan, Managing Editor of Business Aviation. And joining us today is Ron Epstein, Senior Equity Analyst at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Hi, Ron.
Hey, how are you, Molly?
Good. Well, we've got the National Business Aviation Convention and Exhibition getting ready to begin in Las Vegas this year. And a lot has changed since that 2019 show. And Ron, I recently saw you speak on a panel discussion about your perspective about the business aviation industry climbing out of COVID. You called the pandemic the great amplifier, and I just wondered if you could explain what you meant by that.
Yeah, I think you can look across, different industries and different sectors. But if you went into the pandemic weak, you came out weaker. And if you went in strong, you came out stronger. It's if you look at business aviation, it's coming out of COVID in a relatively strong position. And if you remember, going into COVID, it was recovering, right? So we were in the beginning stages of a recovery when it went into COVID. And now we're coming out of COVID and it's recovering even stronger. And there's some reasons about that I'm certain we'll talk about. But that's one example. Another example would be that comes up all the time, a little bit adjacent to our conversation, but the differences between Boeing and Airbus today. Airbus went in strong, Boeing went in weak, largely because of the MAX. And if you look at where we are today, Airbus is much stronger and Boeing's weaker.
So, have we gone through this shifting that we've gone through in the past 18 months? I think that you mentioned that we've kind of come back stronger than maybe some people thought. Is this going to last, or what do you see as we go down?
Yeah, I think that's the big debate, right? It's clearly, and particularly in North America, and I think if you look at the numbers a little bit in Europe, private aviation was a beneficiary of what happened at the airlines, right? You can't. Social distancing and commercial airlines, they're funny bed partners. It just doesn't really work, right? So if you want to travel and be socially distant, or however you want to travel with your own germs, or choose the germs you travel with, private aviation is a way to do it, and it was clearly a benefactor of that. I think the big question now is there were users for sure who tried, and maybe continue to use private aviation who didn't use it before. And I think the view is, once you use private aviation, it's a nice service, right? And how many of those folks will stay with it? And just to remind everyone, a lot of the recovery we've seen in private aviation's largely been not business traffic. It's been, if you want to call it personal traffic, leisure or whatever. And so I think the big question is, of the users that tried it, like it, how many are going to stick with it? And are we going to see what they call a secular shift as opposed to a cyclical shift? I personally believe there will be a step change. I mean, there will be folks that were never thought of using it before, could afford it, tried it, and are going to stick with it. So the user base, I think, effectively through COVID just got bigger. Now, does that effect continue? Is there a tail effect to that? I don't know, right? I mean, we're going through like a nice period now, but how do I say, markets, finances always have a funny way of reverting to a mean. And it seems like right now we're well above a mean in terms of, you pick the metric in business aviation, things are kind of on fire. But they'll probably work their way back to a mean at some point.
So, Ron, some of the pre-owned brokers were talking about just the very, very low levels of business jets that are on the market for sale today. This inventory is at a record low. Prices are starting to creep up, and many compared this to the housing market right now. What do you see? Is this going to last, or will it level out at some point?
Well, if you look back in the history, you go back to the financial crisis, the industry it's still mind-numbing. If you look at the numbers, what happened to this industry in 2009, it just collapsed, and it's taken a long time to work through that inventory. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we were starting the beginning of a recovery before COVID, like an honest recovery. All the things you'd expect to see happen, we're starting before COVID hit. Now we're in a situation where COVID kind of accelerated it. Inventories are very low, so you would expect to see prices go up. And and really, kind of the holy grail for this industry has been since 2008. Will we start to see some pricing at the OEM level? right? It's an industry where I think, the dirty little secret's been since 2008, pricing's been weak across many different airplane types in the industry, both new and used. And now finally, hopefully with this bump up in demand, and I would expect to see, with OEMs can only ramp up so quick, right? And they're not going to be immune to the supply chain shortages that we're seeing in other industries. So this industry will only be able to ramp up so quick. And there's, as you mentioned, not many available for sale, younger aircraft. And that shortage of lift, if you will, should sustain prices for a while. And my guess is people tend to lock on what happened most recently. So my guess is people are going to underestimate how much pricing we're going to get because they're not used to it. We haven't seen pricing in this industry for almost 12, 13 years. So it's not in the mindset. So my guess is pricing is going to do better than people think, be a little stickier than people think, and probably last a little longer than people think.
And what do you see as the biggest opportunities and the biggest challenges in the industry right now?
Yeah, so I think the challenges and opportunities. I mean, the big one is always the environmental impact question, right? So and then this came up at that same conference where we were at. So when you think about environmental impact of private aviation on a per user basis, it tends to use a lot of fuel. Now, how does the industry work with that? And there's been a lot of discussion around alternative power sources, electric, hydrogen, hybrid. So that's an opportunity potentially. I personally don't believe those are the opportunity. I think the real opportunity is in sustainable aviation fuel for this industry and the broader civil aviation industry kind of writ large. So I think that's one of the big opportunities and one of the big challenges. And that's probably medium to long term. I'd say shorter term, probably the biggest challenges that this industry, like many industries, are going to have to deal with are shortages in labor supply, talent. I mean, this is an industry where assembling airplanes is an industry that requires high-end technical talent. It's not can't just grab someone off the street and say start building an airplane. It's skilled labor. So I think there'll be issues around, and there probably are already issues around having enough skilled labor, and then just supply chains themselves. Kind of everything I'm hearing now from kind of the broader industrial world as we get into winter, supply chains are going to get really, really tight. That the supply chain disruptions, the impact that we're seeing globally across industries is with us for a while. So working through that, I think those are going to be the short-term challenges.
So, Ron, what are you seeing with raw material prices and the inventory that manufacturers need to build the airplanes?
Yeah, I think raw materials are going to be an issue, and more importantly, aircraft have microprocessors on it, and silicon, and there's a microprocessor shortage across multiple industries. You've heard of a lot of it in automotive, but I think you're going to start to hear about it more in aerospace. And I wouldn't be surprised if on the quarterly earnings calls this quarter, you start to hear it more from the aerospace and defense world broadly. Some of the issues that they're having around microprocessors. So I think it's not just things like the traditional castings and forgings and so on and so forth, but it's also going to be kind of other stuff like microprocessors.
Okay, well, we're kind of winding down on time. Do you have any last thoughts as we?
Yeah. I mean, it's. I think it'll be an exciting NBAA, right? I mean, it's been kind of a long time coming, so it'll be a lot of fun. It's a little bit of a bummer that the Delta variant's still kind of floating around, so it kind of won't be just a free for all like it potentially could be. But I think it'll be a fun show this year.
Great. Well, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for listening, everyone.